and I'm going to be running the session today. So what we're going to do is, as the title suggests, we're going to work a little bit with Alteryx and we're going to work a little bit with Power BI. But what I really want to gather is just an understanding of how to use the two together and how you should set up your data in order to successfully visualize it. So if you've had a webinar before with me, then you'll know that I kind of just go through some of the basics. So if you're a novice to Alteryx, that's fine. I'll walk through kind of some of the components of the tool. If you've been using it for a long time, I try to throw in some fun tools here and there. So hopefully you'll learn something a little bit new. And I will be showcasing how to connect your data to both Power BI on the web and also on your desktop as well. So let me just get out of these slides. So I just wanted to give everybody a preview of what we're going to be building together. And by building, I mean you watching me build. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, we're going to get some data. I've just gotten this online on, I believe it was Canada's open data portal. Just some information that I thought would be interesting in order to restructure, reorganize, and graph together. So we're going to start with some data, we're going to clean it up, and then eventually we're going to build a dashboard, and we're going to be able to analyze our results based on that dashboard. And don't worry, I just flashed it really quickly. You'll see it later at the end, just to kind of see our start and our end goal. So before we go through all of that, I did want to talk a little bit about Alteryx, the platform, and some useful resources. A lot of us are working from home, so it's a good time for some self-knowledge and self-learning, aka joining webinars like these, or also just looking at the Alteryx community. So for those of you who don't know, the Alteryx community is a great place to ask questions about your current Alteryx model. There are tons of use cases on here. And the people on here are actually really good at answering questions. I know because I'm one of them. So sometimes people will post a question. They'll ask maybe how to pivot a data set or a specific use case to be solved. And very likely people will actually reply to you with the steps that you need in order to finish it, or they'll direct you to a similar question. In addition, on the Alteryx community, again, you could sign up. You don't have to pay for the community or anything like that. We also have the Academy. So there's a bunch of learning paths that you can take, and there's interactive lessons, videos, weekly challenges, and certifications you can get for your LinkedIn or just to have. So the one that I like to point everyone to is Alteryx for Excel users, because people who use Power BI generally use Excel a lot. So if you're looking at how to leverage key things like VLOOKUPs and pivots, and you want to know how to do them in Alteryx, this is a really good guide in order to do so. In addition, we also have courses at NewComp that are specific to this, like for example, the Alteryx and Microsoft Power BI course, if you really want to deep dive and learn how the two tools work together. In addition, what I'll be using with this data set is called the Microsoft Data Starter Kit. So this is the Microsoft Starter Kit. Alteryx has a variety of different starter kits, and they allow you to use some additional tools that will complement Alteryx and the connecting tool together. So for example, this Microsoft dataset, if you have Alteryx installed, you can also download this on top of it. All you have to do is download it, and then the tools will appear the next time you start Alteryx up. This has a couple of features like different workflows that they walk through. So how to prepare data for Power BI and how to export it. And it does give you the solution, but we want to go kind of more step-by-step approach with this information. So anyone interested in this content, just let us know. We'll be able to link you to all the right places. Also, I believe the session is being recorded, so if anyone needs to go back at any point to look at something that I did, that's fine, we'll be able to go back. We're going to leave questions to the end. I believe everyone's muted, but if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I have some colleagues on the line that will be able to help you if you're looking at how to recreate this. In addition, at the end of the session, we are totally able to send you the data, and I'm able to send you the workflow if you'd like to go through and learn how to build this. So let's go ahead and let's start building. So what I have open currently on my screen is just Alteryx Desktop, and this will look the same whether you have a trial or whether you have a 30-day trial or whether you download it. So if you're looking at the trial, what this does is it has a variety of tools And it allows you to use those tools in order to leverage your data, in order to create it in order to reorganize it in a way that has better performance and has better analysis. So we always want to think of the end goal in mind and what particularly we want out of our data set. In addition, it's organized into these top sections, these tabs at the top that are called palettes, and each of these palettes contain a variety of tools that reflect the palette above. For example, if I'm looking at my in and out tool, this is used to import data or output data, among some other things as well. We can prepare our data, which we'll be doing in this webinar here. We'll be manipulating it, creating formulas, deselecting fields that we don't need. We can also join multiple data sources, union multiple data sources, all from different data types. So if I'm joining something with Excel and a SQL database or a shapefile from the web, this is a really good way in order to bring in everything together and blend it all together before putting it in your visualization tool. Another really good reason that you would want to do this already in Alteryx is, like I mentioned before, for performance. If our data is already clean, going in, we have the fields that we want to create a report out of, it is going to perform a lot better than if you try to create those data connections right there or those calculations on the visualization itself. We'll also utilize some parsing, so we'll be looking at regular expression for a little bit today. We'll also be transforming some of your data sets because that's a common question that I got and a common question I got in the previous webinar as well. You're also able to connect directly to your database and even do reporting in Alteryx. So if you want to gain some initial insights before connecting your data to Power BI, you can use some of Alteryx's reporting tools. In addition, we have things in order to help your workflow like documentation, whole spatial analysis. If you're interested in spatial, then I'm sure we'll have a webinar. We can have a webinar on that as well. And then also creating macros apps, and then our whole suite of predictive tools. So the only difference between my version of Alteryx and yours is that you may not see these predictive tools at the top because it's just a separate download. But again, you can still download it for free and you just have a bunch of tools, but we won't get into predictive theory today. We'll leave that for another session. So I'm going to start off with my in and out palette. That's generally where I start. And I'm going to bring in the data set that I want to analyze. So in order to do so, I'm just going to drag the input data tool onto this big blank space called the canvas. Every time I drag a tool onto the canvas, my configuration window, which sits on the left-hand side of my canvas, changes. This changes based on the tool that I drag in. So for example, it's asking me to input a tool. The configuration window is asking, okay, which file or database do you want to connect to? I'm going to click on the little drop down here, and I'm going to connect to a data source that I have on my local desktop. You can see that I can connect to a variety of files by either dragging or dropping them into this window, directly selecting a file, or I can take a look at all the different supported file types. For example, I can bring in a CSV, a Microsoft file, a zip file, text files, spatial files. And just because I've brought in a data set once doesn't mean that I can't bring another one again and combine the two together. In addition, I could connect to a variety of data sources. So if you want to set up your own custom ODBC connection, if you're connecting to Snowflake or SQL, all these connections are available with the tool. Like I said, I just want to connect to an Excel file, so I'm going to click on my little select, and I'm going to bring in this information based on farmers and education, which I know seems totally random, but I found it to be a very cool data set. In addition, when I bring it in, because I'm using one of Alteryx's newer versions, you can see that this Excel input file may look a little bit different than one that you're used to. Not only can I select the sheet that I want to import like previously, but now I could already automatically select a range of cells, rows, or columns to bring in, meaning that you could already filter out unnecessary data even before you bring it into the tool. I want to bring in everything just because I want to show everyone the step-by-step of how to clean it. So I'm just going to stick with sheet 1 and I'm going to click OK. What happens after I connect to the data is on the left-hand side, I have a preview of my data. So the first 100 records, and I get to see some of the fields that have been brought in. I already see that I have some null types, which is no good. and I have a kind of a lot of messy strings as well, underscores and IDs and fields that I may not necessarily want to see. If I want to see a full preview of this data, I'm going to go ahead back to my in and out palette and attach the browse tool. What the browse tool does is just allows you to see all of your data and also does an analysis on your data quality at the same time. What I mean by that is if I take a look at the left-hand side after my data set was run, I have a distribution of all the different types of data that are available in my data set. Some of them have green lines at the top, some of them have red lines at the top, and some of them have a mixture of both. By checking the data quality, I'm seeing how well my data is going to perform. And if I want to look more at my information, I can select one of my red fields like scalar factor here, click on it, and see a breakdown of my data. I can see how many data sets or how many pieces of data I have, the data type size, the maximum and minimum value, the alphanumeric organization, etc. So everything that I need to know in order to analyze my data. If I take a look at why this data is not okay, it takes a look at values with trailing white space, and it looks like every single one of my values in this data set has a trailing white space. Now, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but imagine you have hundreds of millions or a billion rows of data even. Even one little space in there running through your database can cause a lot of grief. So it's best to trim your data and keep it as small as possible. In order to keep our data as small as possible, we can do things like trim any sides that we don't want seen. In addition, what we can also do is make sure that we have the proper data types coming in. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to get the scalar factor. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. And in order to do so, I'm going to bring in my tool called the data cleansing tool. Now, if you click on any of the tools in Alteryx, you'll have a little definition of what the tool does. And if you ever want to know more information, there's generally a hyperlink underneath the tool. So I could click open example, and that's going to lead me to another tab. And it's going to give me a variety of examples on how I could use that particular tool. In this case, like I said, I have the scalar factor that I want to clean up. It says 100% of my data is not okay, and I want to get rid of those trailing spaces. Now, you could always trim this with a formula, but like I said, I wanted to showcase this data cleansing tool, and I'll even zoom in a little bit. And I'm just zooming in by holding Control on my keyboard and zooming in with my mouse. And we'll take a look at what this tool does. It asks me to select a particular field to cleanse. So I know that I want to cleanse that scalar factor. And I also want to see how this data looks like coming in. In addition, I could replace nulls with blanks or zeros. Be careful here because just because something is null doesn't mean that it's zero. It might mean that the data is not available yet. And if I take a look at some of my numerical data points, I have information about certificates and degrees. I have some null values here. This does not necessarily mean that nobody has no certificate or diploma in this section. It just might mean that the data is not available or that data is not recorded. In addition, I can do things like remove unwanted characters, such as, there it is, leading or trailing white spaces. So for now, I'm just going to click on the scalar factor. I'm not going to worry about these other fields because we're going to investigate them together. And I'm going to see that before, so looking at the input of this tool, my scalar factor still has that red stripe on the top. And after the red goes away, the trailing spaces are gone, and I just have a little section that says units. Like I mentioned, not only trailing spaces, but also data values are very key in determining the performance and quality of your data. If I take a look at this results panel at the bottom, which is always going to show me how my data set looks like, I can take a look at the metadata. What the metadata is going to tell me is a list of all the fields and also the type that is available. If I take a look at the bottom, all my educational streams are coming in as a data type string. However, I know this not to be true because I clearly saw that they're numerical values and I want to do counts on them. Sometimes when your data is coming in from a data source, your data type may not always be correct. So you can fix that manually, or you can use the autofill tool. What the autofill tool is going to do is it's going to read each of these particular data sources and it's going to convert it to the smallest data type possible. It takes string values and again converts it to the smallest data type possible. Why you would want something like that is, for example, if you only have a couple of numbers ranging between 1 and 10, you're probably not going to put the big burden on it of being a double or something with a lot of decimal places if you're never going to get those decimal places. The smaller values that are running through, the faster your data performs, the faster your dashboard performs as well. I'm just going to go ahead and click all the educational attainments because I want to see how that gets changed. And as always, I'm going to run my workflow. You may notice me navigating to the top right-hand side of my screen every time I add a new tool because I like to run the tool after I've added it. It does not run automatically. Now, if I go to the side and I take a look at my values, they look the same because the values themselves haven't changed, but it's only the metadata at the other side that has changed. So before, I have a variety of strings coming in indicating that this is a word, but afterwards I've read that data set and it looks like my list size is 4, and this is a small integer. This is not only going to allow me to do formulas and numerical calculations on my data, but it is also going to help it perform faster. So now that we have all this data cleaned up, let's see what we actually have here. So it looks based on 2016 data, so this is probably 2016 census data. I have a breakup of geographies in terms of provinces and all of Canada. In addition, I have some ID fields and some farming types. So all farm types, beef and cattle, dairy, nut and tree farming. It looks like I'm looking at farm operators. I don't have anything in my units. And it's broken up by all the different educational types. So what this data set is telling me is it's taking a look at all count of all the farmers across Canada, broken up by their different provinces, based on all farm types, broken down by farm types, all educational attainments, and also a breakdown of each educational attainment, like apprenticeships, colleges, no certificates. So I think this data set is really interesting. I myself grew up in the city, then moved out to the suburbs, so I didn't know anything about farming until I met my partner and he grew up on a farm, so now I know way too much about farming, especially in Canada. But I really think that's interesting data to look at because there is tons of data that pours through the industry, and there's a lot of things that can be taught either at a college or university level that would be beneficial to this level. So I just wanted to kind of utilize a free data set and also see how we could transform this data. So what I want to do is if I take a look at all these educational attainments, I have an individual column for each and I have 18 fields. That is way too much information for me to put into a dashboard. Instead, I just want one column. I want it to say the type of education, and underneath I want all these different degrees or non-degrees. In order to do this, I'm going to bring in my transform palette. I'm going to bring in my transpose tool. What this does, indicated by the picture, is it takes all my columns or the columns that I've selected and or all the different headers that I've selected and flips it in order to be a single column made up of all those individual rows. I'm going to bring in the transpose tool here. And what the configuration window asks me are what are my key columns, meaning which ones do I not want to flip? Which ones do I just want to keep as they are, and then decide which ones I want to flip on their head. So I'm going to go ahead and select all the key columns up until my education, because I still want a row for date, for geography, for farm type, and all this stuff I'll get rid of later. But what I want, like I said, is I want a single column with all this education, and then I want another column beside it that's going to tell me the number of farm operators for each. After I've set these requirements, I'm going to click Run, and I'm going to see how my data drastically changes from one side to the other. So previously, if I look at the input of my tool, I had 18 fields, and after I only have 13. In addition, under name, I have all my educational attainments as a list, and I have the corresponding value of farm operators. I still have information for my date, from all the different farm types and the farm operators. But now when I make a data, I'm only going to have to rely on bringing in those two columns, the education and the farm type, rather than bringing each one of those column heads in individually. And you might be wondering, well, what if I only want to look at a couple of different education types like college or university? The easier way to do that is to actually filter out that data on the dashboard level rather than having that individual column for each, again, depending on what type of analysis that you do end up doing. So in this case, I have my name and I have my value, but this isn't really meaningful, meaning that if I sent somebody this data set and it said name and value, they are not going to know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to use my favorite tool, select tool. And what this allows me to do is multi-threaded things. So I can deselect fields that I'm not going to be using, rename fields, and change data types. The autofill tool, for example, that took that numerical value and changed it to an integer may not always be accurate. So sometimes you want to decide to change the data type yourself. Let's say you wanted to see an average, so you might have some decimal places there. Then you want to go ahead and change the type of those farm operators. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rename some of the fields. So instead of reference day, I only have 1 year 2016, but I'm just going to leave that as year. For this long ID, I'm just going to change this to ID. I want to keep the farm type, but all these other fields, honestly, I'm not interested in because they're either all repeating values or they're completely null. So they're not needed for my analysis. What I want instead is the name, which is the educational attainment. And also I want the farm operators as well. If I want to change any of my data types, I can just click the drop down and change it to be whatever I want, but for now I'm going to keep it. And in addition, after I've changed the name or the data type, you may see that this kind of salmon color appears at the back. This is to indicate to the user who uses this workflow next that there's been some type of change. So if you're ever wondering if there's been a change, well, it gets flagged in this rename here. I'm going to go ahead and run that, and I'll see the data set shrink even more. So now I only have 6 fields, so getting pretty scarce here. My year, my geography, my ID, my farm type, my educational attainment, and the farm operators. So I could already see in Alberta, for all farm operators and all educational attainments, I have about 57,000 here as of 2016. So an insight's already been drawn. But like I said, I want to compare these all together. In order to do that, I want to continue to clean my data. If I take a closer look at farm type, I can see that other than all farm types, after each one, there's some type of square bracket and a corresponding ID. I do not want to keep this ID in my data source because I want this to kind of look in a readable format. Let's say since this is public data, I want to share it in some type of public forum. Giving somebody an ID or a number to look at may cause them to draw false conclusions and may cause too much cognitive overload. Cognitive overload is when you have way too much information showing and way too much of different types of IDs and string texts, and people have a hard time kind of separating from one from the other. So what I want to do is I want to split off this information and I want to get rid of it from my data source. But you can see how this could be kind of difficult. All farm types doesn't have that square bracket, so it's not like I could split based on a space because then it would just space out types. I can't even split based on my last space. I can split something based on the square bracket, and when there is no square bracket, then I could just keep the remaining farm type. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to use my regular expression tool in order to do so. The reason I like to showcase this tool in webinar is because regular expression is a really cool, crazy language that is still very hard for me. So there could be a million different ways to do this, but I like to showcase tools that I have found been really helpful when I've been using Alteryx for different clients, just so you could see kind of how easy it is to split something off. So for example, I want to choose my column farm type. And I want to do a regular expression that looks at all these words and is going to start parsing the second that it hits a square bracket. In In order to do this, I'm going to use a variety of these regular expressions. And if you're interested in learning regular expressions, there is a lot of great resources online. I'll be happy to send you a link for data that I use. So what I'll be doing is, like I said, I'm using these keys in order to look at all of the values that are available to me. And then I'm going to separate my data the second that I see a square bracket. And any data that comes after that as well, I don't really care about. In terms of the output method, I want to parse out this information, meaning that I'm going to have an output column that's going to give me all of these words. And then notice how I don't have the expression with the square bracket here. This means that I'm not including any information after the square bracket because I don't care about it. I only want all the information beforehand. So I'm going to go ahead and run that data set. And I could see my results in this regular expression that does not look very pretty. First of all, I have nulls every time a square bracket hasn't been found. However, if I take a look at my regular expression and just try to move it here, you can see that I no longer have that square bracket at the end in my fruit and tree nut farming, dairy cattle, and milk production either. So what I now want to do is I want to take the data and I want to replace it with the appropriate farm type. So every time my regular expression has a null output, I'm just going to leave it how it is. And every time I have one of the new features, I'm going to replace it with what's from my regular expression. And in order to do this, I'm going to use my formula tool. Now, a question I generally get is, can't you do this already with the formula tool? Yes, absolutely, but I just want to showcase all the different ways that we can create and clean up fields with this tool. If there's an automatic way that it's been doing with a tool, that is always easier than running a formula, in my opinion. So what I'm doing is I'm going to say if the regular expression is null, then I just want to leave the farm type that's already there. Else, I'm going to put in the regular expression because it no longer has that square bracket. I'm going to end that if statement and spell it correctly as well with end if. With my formulas, I have a little preview at the top that tells me what the result is going to be of the first line. In addition, I have a list of all the functions for strings, dates, math, finance, spatial, just all the functions you can imagine. And if you're ever wondering if Alteryx does a particular function, you can just Google it. Google is your friend. In addition, you can save existing calculations, or you can even open up functions that you use particularly to your workspace. In addition, you can constantly reference calculations that you've already created. So for example, I just referenced farm type above, but I do notice that out of these regular expressions, once again, I have the problem with trailing spaces. So I can either use the data cleansing tool that I've used before, or I can just use my trim tool and I could trim out the farm type. I can decide what I want to trim out, whether it be a particular character, for example, but in this case, I'm just going to leave it as is, meaning it's just going to automatically trim all the white spaces around it. Furthermore, I can get rid of things like these underscores. Under my educational attainment, I have underscores under all of them. Some of them are doubled up as well. So what I want to do is I want to change this educational attainment, and I want to replace those underscores with spaces. I'm going to use my replace function. I'm going to type in my educational attainment. I'm going to find anywhere there's a double underscore, and I'm going to replace it with a space. And let's just see how that looks like for now. So I have my double underscore that's gone, but I still have those single underscores everywhere. So I can do the same thing on another line. I can go ahead and replace, again, replace that educational attainment, tongue twister there. And I could take that underscore and just replace it with a space. Yes, you can absolutely do this in one line. You can do an or statement. You can find one first, then the other, and you can use the regular expression tool to do this as well. using the replace functionality. But again, I just wanted to show all the different ways that we can do this either step by step or all together. Finally, for good measure, I'm going to make sure to trim that field and make sure I have no leaving white spaces around. And finally, click run. And you can see with the time it takes to execute, not much time at all, even though I have all these formulas that are being created. If you want to move the formulas around, you can also drag them and move them into a different order of operations. So now that I see I don't have any underscores, I don't have any trailing spaces, this is looking pretty good. All I want to do now is I only want to look at the data that's valid for me. So I have everything split up by province, but then all of a sudden, I have this information split up for all of Canada. Now, I'm not really interested in the Canada information because I could easily just sum all of the provinces, and I really want to do an analysis on each province individually. So what I want to do is I want to filter out Canada by filtering it out of my data set. In order to do that, I'm just going to take my filter tool and I'm going to attach it to my formula tool. I'm going to use the basic filter. I'm going to filter out everything that does not equal Canada. So it's just going to show me my provinces. You'll see at the bottom that you can also place a custom filter. So for example, if you wanted to write this out as a formula, you could just use a little exclamation point and an equal sign that says does not equal and Canada. Now, it's important that I point this out because we're actually going to go back to this to update our data set, and we're going to see how that updates live in Power BI. Right now, I'm just going to run this current filter, and I'm going to look at the results in my true tab and my false tab. In my true tab, I have a list of all the provinces, my farm types, educational attainments, my farm operators, and nulls when appropriate. And in my false tab, I have 84 records, all information from Canada. So you see how I haven't actually filtered out my information. Let's say the next step I want to do is an analysis based on all of Canada. I can always go back and just make sure that Canada is included, get rid of this filter tool, and run the analysis again. The final thing I want to do before I output this to Power BI is I want to clean everything up. Again, I only want key values in my analysis. So I'm going to take my select tool again. I'm going to attach it to the true tab because this has information for all my provinces. And what I want to do is I want to change the name of geo to province because now it's showing all provinces rather than general geography. In addition, I want to get rid of this regular expression because it's just an additional column that's been put on the end. Nothing really interesting that I want to use out of it. I'm going to run this one last time, and I can see my completed information. So what I have here is I have original information that's been brought in, messy data, unwanted fields, underscores, spaces, and data that I didn't want. I decided to clean up that data. I changed the appropriate data types. I flipped it in order to have a column that has all those educational attainments and all those values. I got rid of fields that I didn't need, parsed out information and brought it back, filtered out only the information that I needed, and also deselected any additional fields that I didn't want. Now, with this workflow, you can always use it over and over again. What I mean is, let's say the 2020 information came out. I can always load in new information or historical information as long as it has the same structure. The good thing about a lot of data sources is you'll always do the same cleaning types and techniques over and over again. If I decide to go and clean this data again, rather than building everything from scratch, I could just go ahead and reconnect a new data source. In addition, if there's something that I want taken out of the data, I can do so by changing any of these tools along the way. And I'll show you what I mean by that now that I'm going to connect it to Power BI. So, like I mentioned, there's that Microsoft Starter Kit that you can download. And what the Starter Kit does is under your Help menu, you have a variety of sample workflows that you can see automatically. Under the Microsoft Starter Kit, I have a variety of Microsoft specific things that I could see in English, French, German, and Japanese. For example, if I want to look at customer sentiment, fuzzy matching, I could click on any of these and it's going to open up a new tab and it's going to go through the workflow for you. The key field that you want to see is at the end, there is a tool called the Power BI Output tool. This is what I'm going to use in order to connect my data directly to Power BI. Now, I can always just use a regular output tool and output my data to an Excel file, for example, CSV file, and use that to bring it to Power BI on my desktop or upload it. But like I said, I want to work all within the Power BI workspace. So I want to bring in the Power BI tool. It may not be easy to find at first after you download the starter kit, but what you could always do is you could search for tools at the top of the screen by clicking on the search bar and typing in Power BI. I'm going to attach my Power BI tool here, and I'm going to call farming education. I'm going to name my data set. I'm going to name the table. I'm going to name the operation. So this means every time I run it, do I want to create a new data set? Do I want to append information? So for example, if your data updates and you run this again, are you going to get new information? Or do you want to replace a data source that already exists? That's all you need to do to set it up. Once you run it, a pop-up will come up, and that pop-up is going to ask you to sign into your online Microsoft account for Power BI. So I already have that opened, which is why you didn't see that little pop-up. But what that pop-up does is it automatically puts your data source in here. So this is the online Power BI app. And by clicking run, I was able to see the new information come up in my workspace. So if I take a look at regular Power BI, I have some information, so some other demos that I've created for other clients. And in your workspace, you also have information about all content and data flows. If I decide to organize this by what was newly refreshed or what's new in my data set, then I could see all this content that's come in recently. In addition, I see that I have a new data set called Farming Education, and I could take this data set now and I could build a report on it just from there. So I've clicked run at around 2:42 p.m. on June the 3rd, which is right now when I ran this. I have this little yellow symbol that says that this is a new data set. So I can go ahead and create a report. In order to create a report, you have to understand the data that's coming in. So if I take a look at the right-hand side, I see my data again. I have the educational attainment, I have the sum of farm operators. This is telling me it's a numerical value, the farm type, the ID, the province, and the year. So now if I want to build any visualizations based on this information, I can do so. I can take a look at my farm type, for example, and the count of farm operators. And if I wanted to go ahead and build a bar chart, I can click on that bar chart visualization. In addition, if I want to break down this bar graph by each of the educational attainments, I can click it and it's automatically going to be created for me. In addition, if I want to create something new, I could click on a blank space and I could go ahead and create, let's say, a donut chart with all my different educational attainments and farm operators. I can choose the appropriate visualization that I want to see, and I could also take it and put it in different parts of my dashboard in order to organize it. Now I automatically have a breakdown of what percentage got each section. In addition, I can add things like maps automatically. If I click on province and farm operators, this is automatically going to create a map based on those province names. And it's just going to have a little point that says where most of my farmers are. I have a lot in Alberta and Ontario and quite a few in Quebec as well. In addition, as I'm organizing this information, I could also do things like set individual KPIs. So if I wanted just to see a number that said all of my farm operators that existed, I could go ahead and click on a particular card and it's going to show me all the info. However, there is a problem here. If I take a look at my data set, and I take a look at these fields, it looks like I have over 1 million farm operators, and if I'm unfamiliar with the information, then that might seem fine. However, take a look at my donut chart breakdown. Over 50% is all educational attainments. This means that my data is being skewed. Not only did I have all of Canada in my data set that I had to filter out, but I also had all farm types and all educational attainments. This is not a proper distribution of each individual education attainment per farm type, but instead all educational attainments is skewing my data. So how would I go and amend this? Instead of going back all the way to the beginning, dragging this information in and getting rid of it, I can just update the field that I no longer want to see. So for example, when I went to transpose my data, I specifically chose all educational attainments to be included in my data column. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that transpose tool. I'm going to deselect all educational attainments, and I'm going to run the data set again. So after I run this data set, I'm going to go back to Power BI. I'm going to refresh the data, and then I could build that information again. So for example, if I wanted to see my all educational attainments and those farm operators, I will no longer have all of that skewing the data set. Instead, I have that secondary information, college, non-certificate, universities, etc., in order to do my educational analysis. In addition, if you want to do this content in Power BI or in the Power BI desktop, you can do so as well. So let's say I wanted to create a new data set or a new dashboard. I'm going to click on File and I'm going to open up a new report. I'm just opening on my other screen here. And you could see that I could connect to a bunch of different data sets, Excel, Power BI. So if I exported this as an Excel data set, I could do so here, or a Power BI data set, I can connect it to Power BI as well. When you have your Power BI data set linked with your email, let's close this here. Once I'm linked with my email, I could go ahead and I could click on that Power BI dataset, and it's going to automatically link me to the data sets that I have available, and I could sort it by ones that were refreshed or ones that were created. Again, if I click on that farming education information that I created, I can open it up to create the appropriate data set out of there. It works the exact same as I was seeing online in order to do that appropriate breakdown and see the information as it is presented. Organize it, and share it as well. In addition, I just wanted to show kind of how it looks like in my workspace. For example, if I were to save that data source, every time that I update the data, it automatically gets updated when I refresh the page. You don't have to worry about going back and recreating it again. And once you've taken out all the fields that you no longer need, this will get updated as such. The really good thing about this tool is even if I run this while Power BI is open, all I have to do is refresh the page and the data gets refreshed as well. This visualization remembers what data set was associated with it. So when I click that refresh, this is going to automatically update as well. In addition, I can get rid of other features. So for example, I also had all farm types. I can use my filter tool in order to get rid of that information. So I could say I want to see geography does not equal Canada, or farm type equals all farm types. Again, all I have to do is rewrite that data, make sure that the data was replaced. And if I go back to see where that data is in my workspace, when it was last refreshed, or when I could see it, I can take a look at that data set again and build based off those reports. So pretty neat stuff, different ways to connect Alteryx to Power BI. Again, some of the takeaways here are it's very important just to make sure that you kind of plan what you're trying to build, don't have too much cognitive overload, and that you want to have the proper insights that are available. So that's all I have in terms of the formal webinar. I'm going to pass it back to Liam and Sophie, and just in case anybody has any questions, please let me know, and then we'll be able to wrap.
Perfect, thanks, Kathleen. So Kathleen, do you mind switching back to the slides? I have a couple more things I want to go over with folks. Okay, perfect. So a couple of reminders of different resources we can help you with afterwards. As I mentioned beforehand, we can extend your trial, get you set up with an extended trial for 30 days rather than the typical 14 days. If you need any help with building out your workflows or any use cases that you're working on, feel free to reach out. We're going to be emailing everyone after this, and we're happy to get someone on the line like Kathleen to help you out through that. We also do have formal training that we can offer. So you're more than welcome to visit our website and check out all the different Alteryx courses that we offer. We offer everything from like the introduction, that might be a half day or a full day, all the way up to more advanced things like machine learning and natural language processing. So we really do have a wide range of options there. Kathleen, if you don't mind going to the next slide as well. This is another really handy thing if you're looking to dive into some different areas within analytics. These are all available on our website. They are other boot camps that focus on different areas that we see are very relevant within the analytics space. They're pretty self-explanatory based off their fun, quirky names that we've given them, but gives you an opportunity to do data lakes, APIs, data science, blending, which is with Alteryx, crystal ball development, as well as machine learning. And then the last slide, Kathleen, we're going to go to is our upcoming events that are Alteryx focused. We'll be sending these over with our follow-up email. I know they're not necessarily relevant to everyone, but just thought it might be an opportunity for those of you who might be interested. So we're doing an Alteryx and property management session on June 9th, and then one that's focused on Alteryx and Tableau for government. So this can be all levels of government within Canada or the US. So before we head off, let's take a look at the Q&A, see if there's any questions we have. Looks like we do have one here, Kathleen. So every time you make changes in the workflow, you have to rebuild the dashboard in Power BI.
No, so if you have a saved dashboard actually, and you refresh the data source, all you have to do is refresh the page and your data will be updated. So let me, I can even show that. So let me take a look at my content. Here, it's education based on the data that I built here. Or I can actually just go ahead and save this. So let me just build something quick and then be able to see that. I just didn't save it previously. So if I were to build my same report, and I'll just put 2 fields in here for now, and then save this. So here I have all farm types, for example. So if I were to get rid of this information and replace the data source and run it and go back here, sometimes it takes a minute or two, but eventually when I refresh it, it goes away. Oh, okay, so I'll just refresh it again. But generally, yeah, when you have it saved and you have it connected to the same data source, and then you refresh it, it's just going to automatically refresh in Power BI. You don't have to worry about reclosing it or rebuilding it. Other questions? Oh, I see another question in the chat that I could address. So one of the key functions of Power BI is the ability to create data relationships between multiple data sets. How would you approach building data relationships in Alteryx and using Power BI as a dashboard-only tool? That is a really good question as well. So like I mentioned, I didn't get to utilize a lot of these tools now, but a lot of the great tools they have in Alteryx are these join tools. So joining, union, multiple joins, you could take a bunch of disparate data sources, database relationships, SQL relationships, and I do recommend you kind of rebuild these relationships here. Or if you have those relationships built already that you want to connect and you want to just do some basic data cleansing, then you can just use them both in conjunction with each other. So I'll be happy to send you information about how to create efficient joins, unions, and information in Alteryx as well.
And Kathleen, I've got a couple questions here that were sent directly to me, but maybe I'll just get you to answer them in case anyone else has the same concerns.
Sure.
So the first one is, can you publish to workspace other than that my workspace, say be a premium or a shared one?
Oh, so when you're posting to your workspace, right now when you just automatically post, it's going to go to your workspace, but you could always move your data source somewhere else. If you have like a shared folder, if you need to share this with other colleagues.
Okay. And then another question is, can the workflow and Power BI dataset be automized to run every day?
Yeah, so if you want to run this workflow every day, we have the Alteryx scheduler that is available. It's additional, so you either have Alteryx automation, you would either have to log on every day to do it, or if you set up the scheduler, either with Alteryx Server or the automation tool, you can set up to run as often as you want. And like I said, when this data refreshes, it'll automatically be refreshed in Power BI, and then your dashboard will automatically reflect it as well.
Perfect. And then there's a last question here, which I can actually tackle. Is there a webinar that covers the predictive tab? The answer to that question is there is not one, I do not think, scheduled at this moment. But that sounds like a great idea to schedule one and make sure that we facilitate that. I can work with Sophie on that as well. So thank you for that question and idea. That's the last that I see in my chat. Kathleen and Sophie, I don't know if you see anything. Oh, there's a Q&A here. Oh, just a thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't have any others on my end either. If anyone didn't get a chance to ask a question, or if it comes up later, you're more than welcome to email any of us. Reply back to the follow-up email is probably easiest. We're happy to answer them offline as well.
Perfect.
And with that, I guess thanks everyone for your time this afternoon, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.